Look, a year ago, Labour celebrated this really stonking victory, had a massive majority. This week, it feels like a mess. What's gone wrong?
It's not a mess, but what's gone wrong is really the lack of a narrative, a story of the objectives of the government and why they're working towards it and how they're working towards it. Now, they are working towards it with a series of really commendable and absolutely essential policies. They are barely noticed because they're obscured by all the song and dance and noise, drums banging and cymbals clashing of the winter fuel payment being massively reduced and then restored, the welfare programme, the two-child benefit cap, and the cuts in development aid, all those negative things that really are heartily disliked across the labour movement and more widely, much more widely. And that means that apart from the distaste for undertaking those policies, the cloud hangs over the accomplishments of the government, which are substantial and will become greater, and people are not getting the message. So they've got to change in terms of focusing on accomplishment and communicating the accomplishment.
Well, you've mentioned a number of things there, but the central point you're making is that there isn't a clear message from government. Now, I'm old enough to remember that under your leadership of the Labour Party, I can probably sum it up pretty quickly now. First thing, we're not mad anymore.
Right.
And number two, we're going to get rid of extremists. And number three, we are the party of social justice against the Thatcherite Tories who are going to do all sorts...
Social justice and economic efficiency.
There you go.
That's the phrase that I
there
coined.
You go. Why haven't we got as clear a message from this Labour administration?
Partly because of the circumstances in which they had to operate, necessarily, in order to get elected. They put an emphasis on caution and discipline, which was crucial in the wake of the chaos that had gone before under Corbyn. And they really did restore credibility and respect for the Labour Party, but it did mean that they depressed expectations and limited themselves by saying they were going to rigidly stick to fiscal rules and that they weren't going to substantially or indeed increase, quote, quote, taxes on working people at all. Now, that means that unless you are looking for other original sources of revenue in order to invest in public services and long-term investment, then you are really jammed in a bit of a corner.
I get the point about discipline, but they came in, they had this huge majority. They've had essentially no challenge. The opposition is divided, and they would have room to, if you like, be a little bit more flexible. Do you think that they should think again about what people say is boxing themselves in with the fiscal rules?
I think if you were sitting at the cabinet table and offered the words you've just used, you would find a ready hearing. Because people are willing, and have been for some time, naturally, because they're pragmatic politicians, as well as people with convictions and strong values. They are listening to the ideas of adjustment and alternative. There's no question at all about that.
So if you were, far more likely scenario, you were sitting at the cabinet table, you would say, look, everybody, I know that discipline matters, but is it time to think again about chaining ourselves to this mantra?
Well, I said a couple of years ago, in actually defending the caution of the opposition, led brilliantly, in my view, by Keir Starmer. And it was that the essential disciplined caution of opposition won't be allowed to become stiffness or stagnation in government. Now, unfortunately, the appearance has been given, it's not actually the accurate picture, but the appearance has been given that they have bogged down by their own imposed limitations. There are ways around that, ways out of it, pathways that I think people are willing to explore and actually would commend themselves to the great majority of the general public. They include, for instance, asset taxes in a period in which, for the last 20-odd years, in the United Kingdom, like quite a lot of other Western economies, earned incomes have stagnated in real terms, while asset values have zoomed. They've just gone through the roof.
Houses,
and
stocks
they've
and
been
shares, all of that.
barely touched, absolutely. And they've been barely touched. Now, you wouldn't have to touch assets of under 6 or 7 million, so people's houses would be secure, obviously. But even by going for an imposition of 2% on asset values above 10 million, say, which is a very big fortune, the government would be in a position to collect 10 or 11 billion a year. Now, it's not going to pay all the bills, but it does two things, or that kind of levy does two things. One is to secure resources, which is very important, revenues. But the second thing it does is to say to the country, we are the government of equity. And this is a country which is very substantially fed up with the fact that whatever happens in the world, whatever happens in the UK, the same interests come out on top, unscathed all the time, while everybody else is paying more for gutted services. Now, I think that a gesture, or a substantial gesture, in the direction of equity, fairness, would make a big difference.
So two things. You think that when Rachel Reeves comes to present her budget in the autumn, number one, she should contemplate tax rises. And secondly, you would say tax rises on wealth and assets.
Yes, I would, because I think they should stick to the fiscal rules they've established as a way of strong reassurance about their commitment. It's very, very, very important, not just for the public, but for the markets too, and indeed for their own self-confidence, which is very important.
But isn't the problem here, because you had to confront this yourself, that the markets, and to some extent the electorate, are more suspicious of Labour's propensity to tax and spend?
Yes.
And maybe there's something to be said for having bent over backwards to demonstrate, as Rachel Reeves obviously did, that there is no circumstance in which Labour governments would do what they're reputed to do, which is to promise the earth and then make you pay for it.
Okay, to start with, they didn't promise the earth. And they're actually making substantial gains with record public investment commitments and the biggest ever commitment of resources, for instance, to the National Health Service, which is starting, even after a year, to have a significant effect. Now, the important thing is that if you're going to make an increase in taxation, to explain in detail and repeatedly where it's coming from, and secondly, why it's being levied and where it's going to. Now, I'm certain, I know about the suspicion, which is a good discipline. Labour has got to accommodate this suspicion and say, look, we're being absolutely out front and we can demonstrate the veracity, the truth of the integrity of what we're saying by indicating to you in very strong and clear terms who we are taxing, what we are taxing, and why we're doing it, and where we're going to spend it. It's very, very important.
How serious a threat do you think a Corbyn-led party to the left of Labour is going to be?
Well, I understand they're having a bit of difficulty overthinking up a name. And I, in a comradely way, I'd suggest one. It would be the Farage Assistance Group. Because the reality is, and everybody knows it, a division in the anti-conservative, capital C or small c, anti-right-wing vote can only assist the parties of the right, the Conservatives especially now, under Mrs. Badenoch, and under Farage, the Reform Party. So the splintering, fragmentation, offered by a new party of the left, as they say, I've got my doubts about that, but of the left, can only be of assistance to the enemies of Labour, of the working class, the people who have no means of sustaining themselves other than the sale of their labour by hand and by brain, and can only be of benefit to the egos of those who are running such a party. And they haven't decided who should do that yet either.
Yes, well, this is a great history of ultra-left parties, isn't it? They splinter, but you did have to face yourself. You're famous for facing down the militant tendency.
Yeah.
And you took it seriously.
Yeah.
Should Starmer take this as seriously? I mean, he's been directing his fire at reform recently, but maybe he needs to look to his left as well.
Yes, I don't think Keir should worry himself too much about reform or about Corbyn, because he's the Prime Minister, he'd be punching down. But there are other people throughout the party who should be taking Corbyn and reform very seriously. One, because of the power of seepage of votes in crucial seats away from the Labour Party, which in our first past the post system is particularly damaging. And secondly, because reform and the Conservatives are the natural enemy of progressives in any case, and also sailing under false flags. I mean, here's Farage. A couple of weeks ago, Farage was down in South Wales saying he wanted to reopen the pits, coal mines, and that he wanted to restart the blast furnaces in Port Talbot Steelworks. Now, as it happens, totally by coincidence, when I was a student for 5 or 6 years, I worked in the steelworks. I worked on the blast furnaces. My father was a blast furnaceman. The idea of restarting a blast furnace is the other side of impossible. I mean, it's ridiculous. And reopening a coal mine would not just be perilous, it would be lethal. So either Farage knows that and is deliberately lying, or he doesn't know it and he's extremely stupid.
You called him the enemy. That's quite a strong term.
Oh, yeah, they are the enemy. Yeah.
In what way?
I mean, well, they're poseurs. I mean, you just got to look at them and listen to them to know that they're following the classic path of, first of all, finding and harvesting grievance, resentment, division. Then, secondly, finding someone to blame. It can be the metropolitan elite, so-called, but it can be other groupings in society, pointing the fingers all the time. Then you have to offer very simplistic responses, never answers, to very complex problems, and then hope that people are so brassed off with the conditions in which they're living, and I'd say with some justification, that you can harvest that grievance, offer some culprits for electoral punishment, and backed up, for instance, by a kind of invented history that says there was a time when our country was great and feared and respected, and that's been sacrificed and sabotaged by the metropolitan elite and this group and that group. And you can then get people, not for the first time in history, to believe the glibness. Now, it's happened before, it can happen again, and we've got to prevent it. One of the ways
when you say before...
When it's happened before, it happened in Europe in the 1930s, in this country in the 1930s.
You're thinking about Mosley and so forth.
Yeah, I'm not accusing reform of being fascist. Of course, they're not that. But they are using, consciously or unconsciously, a similar playbook, and it's very dangerous.
Can I just ask you very quickly, last question. When you became leader of the Labour Party, the biggest challenge was you dealt with militant, but the SDP threatened to break the mould of British politics. One of the features of the current situation is that we now have 5 parties who are all, between 10 and 25% of the vote. Do you think that the mould has finally been broken, that the Labour-Tory duopoly is over?
I think it's quite probable, certainly for a period. I think that the organisational capability and the numbers that are still in the 2 main parties, and the fact that politics in every country is basically divided into broadly the left, broadly the right, and people who vary in their emphasis on the centre. Now, at the moment, that's represented in our country by 5 or even 6 parties. And it does mean that there's a certain bewilderment. One of the responses to that, I would make, of course, but it's not going to happen for a long time, is the introduction of a more proportional system of representation. It's not going to happen for a long time, but I've been campaigning for that for quite a time. But secondly, it also means that the large parties have got to make a direct appeal to re-establish their credentials with the mass of the population. I'm certain indeed, Labour can do that with achievement. High levels of public investment in the things that matter to people, the condition of their communities, the opportunities of their kids, and the health of themselves and their elderly people.